with the scriptures, common sense and rationale, if you want to talk about it in that way, are incredibly important when interpreting a passage. Um, Common sense is helpful in this way. I know that the obviousness part that we talked about before, that has to be determined. But the idea of using reason is important and is necessary for studying God's word. Hopefully, we understand that taking one verse out of context is inappropriate if we want to understand the whole story, right? You shouldn't do this with Tolkien or Lewis. That's common sense, right? If you want to know the story of the Lord of the Rings, you don't turn to one passage, one verse, or not verse, but one sentence rather, in the Fellowship of the Ring and understand what the whole story is all about. And so you shouldn't do that with the Bible either. And for most people, that is common sense, right? However, common sense escapes us when we proof text verses into an argument without considering the context of those passages. That is irrational if we want our arguments to be sound or if we want to determine if our arguments are even true or not. You might have a text and you may say, well, this is what it says, and then someone says, well, what about the verse before it? And you're kind of lost. You don't really know what's going on there because you haven't studied, right? It doesn't make sense. That's not common sense to just pull something out and say, well, this is what I believe, without considering the rest of the passage, the rest of the context. Um, an example is that it is irrational to suspect that eating locusts and honey is the most holy diet that someone can have, since Jesus said that John was the greatest man born to women, Matthew 11 and verse 11, and that he ate locusts and honey, Matthew chapter 3 and verse 4. You could take those passages and say, well, hey, look at this, but arriving at such a conclusion would not come from, it's not common sense to make that conclusion. It is not something that comes from sincere logical analysis, because if we study God's word, we can see that there are other things, right? It doesn't say that was the thing that made him a great man. The scriptures do talk about why he was great, but the rest of scriptures also talk about what else makes a person great. Jesus talks about being the least. If you want to be the least, you'll be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven.